All right, let's begin. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whether where you are in the world. My name is Dr. Amber Silver. I'm the co-lead of the Coast and Ocean Risk Communication Community of Practice, which is a community sponsored by the Marine Environmental Observation Prediction and Response Network, MEOPAR, a federally funded network of centers of excellence. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar titled Lessons Learned from Community Engaged Research and Capacity Enhancement, North-South Collaborations to Support Low-Impact Arctic Shipping Corridors Decision-Making. Now, this is one of two webinars that explore topics of community-driven research carried out under the University of Ottawa-led Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project. This is in 14 communities across Arctic Canada that resulted in a series of community-specific maps to inform users of Arctic waters about significant socio-cultural, archaeological, and ecological areas and local travel routes, and related recommendations for integration into the low-impact shipping corridors. This virtual presentation focuses on lessons learned from the project, from the perspectives of the academic research community, community partners, and youth community researchers, with potential lessons for industry and government representatives who are interested in collaborating with Northern communities. Now, we're going to begin with a series of presentations from our speakers that will range from about 10 to 20 minutes apiece. If you have any questions as you're listening in, please feel free to drop them into the chat feature, and we will gather them and read them to our panel at the end of the discussion. And again, just a friendly reminder for those who came in a little bit late, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it on our website and with our community partners. So with that being said, I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Natalie Carter to introduce herself and our other panelists. Dr. Carter?
So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Natalie Carter, and I'm a research associate at the University of Ottawa in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Geomatics, and also at McMaster University in the School of Earth, Environment, and Society. Thanks. And I'm really happy to be here today and share the virtual stage with Shirley Tarlick and with Natasha Simony. We're going to be speaking today about the lessons we learned through research partnership and capacity enhancement in Inuit and Northern, or the Inuit homeland in Arctic Canada. And these are the lessons we learned while conducting the Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project and beyond. The Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices project is led by Dr. Jackie Dawson, and she's an associate professor at the University of Ottawa and the director of the Environment, Society, and Policy Group. And I'm the community research lead for the project. Shirley, who's joining us today, is from Arviat Nunavut, and in our project, she was a community partner. And Natasha, who's joining us from Pond Inlet, Nunavut today, is a community researcher on the project and was also a research participant. So we'll be presenting a range of perspectives today. So I'd like to begin by recognizing the participation and contributions of our 133 research participants, as well as the immense contributions made by our 59 youth community researchers, many of whom are shown in the collage here on the right, and our partners and transdisciplinary team members, both Northern and Southern based, who are shown here in some of the other photos as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the support that was provided for the conduct of this research, and also thank Cindy Marvin and Jennifer Steele for the invitation to participate today, and the Coast and Ocean Risk Communication Community of Practice, MEOPAR, Clear Seas, and the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum for inviting us to be here today. So I'll start by briefly describing the Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project, including our methods and collaborative partnered approaches. And then I'm going to share some key lessons learned that we learned while conducting the research, including some of the benefits and challenges and how we address these challenges. So marine vessel traffic in Arctic Canada has more than doubled since 1990. And in response to that recent growth in marine vessel traffic and the fact that that vessel activity is expected to continue increasing as climate change increases navigability in the region, the Canadian Coast Guard, Transport Canada, and Canadian Hydrographic Service are co-developing these low impact shipping corridors as an adaptation strategy. And an example of the corridors is shown here. In 2017, Transport Canada announced that the Government of Canada would enhance their partnerships with Indigenous communities and Arctic stakeholders to establish these low impact shipping corridors. And the corridors, the goal of them is to provide the infrastructure, navigational support, and emergency response services that are needed for safer marine travel, while at the same time respecting the environment and local ecology and cultures. So the corridors have not yet been legislated, and they're still being refined by the federal agencies that are leading this initiative. And while a large amount of data from different sources were used to establish the location of the corridors, important knowledge from Inuit communities in Arctic Canada has yet to be considered in much detail. And of course, Inuit harvest country food from the ocean and coastal areas, including seal, narwhal, fish, eggs, berries, all to feed their families and communities. And they have strong connections to the land, the water, and the sea ice that they rely on daily for sustenance and for cultural practices. And Inuit have been thriving in the region for 4,000 years. So the Arctic Corridors Northern Voices project was established in direct response to the vital need to consider Inuit knowledge of the culturally significant marine areas that are in those maritime corridors across Arctic Canada. So the main goals were to generate an inventory or a foundation of scientific and Inuit knowledge about shipping trends, shipping opportunities and risks, culturally significant marine areas that ships travel through, as well as community identified recommendations for the low impact shipping corridors. So the project was conducted in and with 14 communities, all 6 of them in Inuvialuit settlement region, shown here in yellow, and 7 of them in Nunavut, shown here in kind of coral or pink, and 1 in Nunavik, shown here in purple. So we partnered in each community with organizations that were known to engage in collaborative projects and facilitate relationships that benefit local and visiting researchers. So in Arvia, for instance, we partnered with the Akimavik Society, and Shirley's joining us from there today. In other communities, we partnered with the Hunters and Trappers Associations or the Akarvik Barriers to Bridges program. And 49 youth, Inuit and Northern youth, they were aged about 15 to 45 years old, were identified by community partners, and they participated in the community workshops in the role of cultural liaisons and co-facilitators. And together we met with and documented the knowledge of over 130 knowledge holders. So during those workshops, we met with elders, people who are active on the land and had expert knowledge of a variety of geographical locations. So for instance, during the workshop, participants identified wildlife habitat, places where wildlife were feeding and breeding, and their migratory routes. We also mapped local harvesting and camping sites and local travel routes as well. And then we also discussed the opportunities and risks related to marine vessel traffic and marine vessel management recommendations for each season, and in particular for the low impact shipping corridors. So our methods and the Inuit identified recommendations are available in these open access papers that are shown here, and Chloe's going to put the links to them into that chat box as well in case you'd like to have more detail. And also for each community, we wrote a report that summarizes the highlights of our findings, and those are available on our website reports page, and the website is arcticcorridors.ca. Today, of course, though, the focus is on our lessons learned through research partnership and capacity enhancement in Inuit Nunavut. So for about the next 10 minutes, I'm going to focus on that. And Shirley and Natasha and I, along with Gita Lubicic, Dr. Gita Lubicic, shown here in the middle on the top, who's at McMaster University, and Dr. Jackie Dawson, shown here on the bottom right, we all reflected on our methods and the benefits of those methods we used, as well as the challenges that came up while we conducted the research. And so our reflections are explained in great detail in the paper that's referenced here as well. In sharing for our team of Inuit and Northern and Southern-based research, our efforts to engage in partnered or co-led research were a critical part of our research and our learning experience. So we really wanted to explore what co-leadership meant in practice, and today we'll share our reflections and lessons learned from working together. And in sharing our reflections, we want to contribute to the increasing dialogue and efforts around knowledge co-production and Inuit self-determination and research. And on a broader scale, our work is part of the ongoing transition in how research is being conducted in Inuit Nunavut. So I'll explain. Over the past 4 to 5 decades, collaborative approaches to research have evolved along with Inuit efforts to finalize and implement land claims. But more recently, transitions from participatory research to partnership research are being emphasized. And Inuit, non-Inuit researchers and research institutions are really striving to develop these models of co-leadership and knowledge co-production that create value for Inuit and their communities. And a great reference, if you'd like to learn more about how to contribute to this research paradigm shift, is the National Inuit Strategy on Research. And it was published in 2018 by Inuit Kanatami, ITK, the organization in Canada that represents over 65,000 Inuit. So the expectations for researchers wishing to work in Inuit Nunavut have really changed over the past decade. Mrs. Mary Simon, who is the former president of ITK, wrote a report about Arctic leadership. And in it, she stated that any Arctic strategy worth pursuing must put working with Inuit at its heart and not at the periphery. And certainly this foundational principle applies to research, including the importance of conducting research with and not on Inuit, and on involving those who are most affected by the research topic and findings, and by addressing Inuit research priorities as well, whenever working in the region. Central to this evolving research paradigm is the necessity for two-way relationships. So this has to do with knowledge exchange and co-learning, and basically being open to and supportive of learning from each other's expertise, both Northern and Southern expertise. So today we'll offer some lessons learned that we hope will be helpful and can inform future research initiatives. So I'm just going to highlight 4 of the main lessons that we developed, and Shirley and Natasha will build on and share their perspective as well. So the first was the importance of conducting the research that's relevant to local needs and interests. And certainly shipping is a hot topic in communities. And so we found that the research participants were really motivated. They had already talked about and thought about shipping and the impacts on their communities. So when they came to the workshops, they were so engaged, and the information they shared was very detailed and extensive. And we had a very high participation rate. In fact, one of the participants in Pond Inlet reflected during the workshop that this was fun sitting around debating this stuff because it was of interest to them. Now, there were challenges that came along with that, in that it was really important that we balance time to make sure that the local needs and interests and also the visiting research interests were addressed during the workshops. So we really had to keep on time and keep focused, but make sure that everyone's viewpoints were included. Participants also had a real urgency for change. They were giving recommendations to manage marine vessels, and they wanted to see those happening in the next shipping season. And so we really had to talk about realistic timelines and the fact that I would need to analyze the information, come back and verify it, and then we would share it with the federal agencies involved, and we would have to wait and see how that information was used. So a second key lesson that we learned, and this one was particularly valuable as well, was the benefit of visiting researchers and local organizations partnering together. So I can't even begin to tell you that as a visiting researcher in a community, how helpful it was that the local organizations would leverage their local networks. They would mobilize the youth and participants and get them involved and engaged. And they also were an incredible support in managing logistics and liaising between me and the youth and the community, or in all directions, and answering any questions that we had as well. There were some challenges that the local organizations experienced. They're involved in so many initiatives that while they definitely wanted to support ours, at times their capacity was strained to be involved in the way that they might have liked to. So it was really important to discuss timelines, to come up with a plan of when to visit and when to do this work. And often I would contact them a year to 6 months in advance. It was also important to respect that there might be communication lags because, again, for me, my research was a key priority, but for the local organizations, they had many initiatives that they were supporting. It was really important also to have informal and formal meetings. So as soon as I arrive in a community, one of the first things that I would do is to go and just introduce myself in person, maybe to the HTO managers, the Hunters of Trappers organization manager, or someone in the hamlet, and then also offer to give formal presentations to boards and councils to share about our proposed research, and then later also to share results. So a third lesson we learned was the importance of including youth, cultural liaisons, youth as cultural liaisons and co-facilitators. So in each community, the youth participated in a 3-day-long co-learning event. And along with our community partners and other team members, I know at least one of them is on the call today, I think Shirley Tarlick. Together we taught them the research methods needed for this project. But essentially they taught me how best to conduct research in their communities. So youth raised community awareness about the project, but also taught me about local seasons, wildlife, harvesting activity, the areas we would map. They helped to identify who should participate in the mapping workshops and who interpreters should be. And together we refined the questions to be asked during the workshop to make sure they're relevant and address community priorities, and also to make sure that they were easily understood in both English and in Inuktitut. Then together we hosted the community workshops that I described earlier. The youth shared invaluable cultural insights during project planning, while we were refining our methods and questions, and while we were implementing the research. They also answered many of my questions that participants would otherwise have been asked. So the youth really reduced research fatigue by shifting the burden from the research participants. So in fact, the youth pre-identified what local seasons we'd be discussing. And that really led the organization of our workshops. Another lesson that was great that we identified was that the opportunity for intergenerational knowledge exchange was really warmly received. And certainly our sense was that during the mapping exercises and discussions, community members were sharing information and knowledge with one another, including and importantly with local youth. And elders and experts wanted to share, and the youth definitely wanted to learn. The youth also identified intersecting or other hot topics related potentially to shipping. So for instance, here's a list on the left of some of the potential impacts that youth identified prior to one of the workshops. Youth had really strong community ties, which made them excellent champions for the research. It also created a bit of a challenge in that it restricted their availability. So youth also had family demands, jobs, school, extracurricular activities. So it was really important for us to build in enough time and discuss the youth's availability and adjust our timelines in order for them to be really involved. We also noted that participants expected youth sometimes to know the answers to the questions that they were asking. And so the participants' expectation of the youth's local knowledge sometimes made the participants reluctant to answer the questions. And because of cultural norms, some of the youth were uncomfortable asking elders and other experts follow-up questions. So this is where our co-facilitation really helped out, that I could ask for clarification, or the youth could remind the participants that it was important to articulate their knowledge so that I could understand it, so we could document it, and it could be shared with decision makers. We also found it was very important to invest in skilled interpreters because youth's degree of level of fluency in English and Inuktitut meant that often they benefited from having the support of skilled hired interpreters. So the fourth lesson that I'll share about is the value of conducting results validation and sharing exercises. So we would do the youth training and then the workshops, and then I would write a draft report and colleagues would make draft maps, and we would share them first with the youth, then with the research participants, and then with the community as a whole. So this really made sure that our results were accurate and comprehensive, because it never failed that while I was writing the report or we were doing the maps, we realized, oh, we didn't really ask about this, or I didn't quite understand what this meant. And so it really improved the robustness of our research. It also created a lot of trust in coming back to the community and demonstrating this respect and reciprocity of sharing these results back with them. And it was an important opportunity to confirm if and which results could be shared publicly. It was also an opportunity for participants to change how much their participation was credited or anonymous. And it meant ultimately that our project outputs were culturally appropriate, non-technical, and accurately reflected participants' views and community sentiments. And so again, looping back, that made sure that the outputs were relevant to community needs and priorities. We found it was important to offer to share either in a group or individually, depending on participants' preferences and availability, recognize that some may not wish to participate, and be sure to discuss appropriate remuneration to thank them for their time and their expertise. So in conclusion, definitely this process resulted in very robust research results. It did require sense of time, approximately 3 weeks in each community. To work in 14 communities required about 1.5 million in funding overall, but it really strengthened North-South relationships and enhanced community capacity, so that when the Southern-based team members left, the community still had those skills to continue conducting this research. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'll pass it on to Shirley now.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So I'm Shirley Tarlick. I work with the Archaeological Society. I co-chair the board of directors there. We are a community wellness organization dedicated to addressing issues that are raised by people in the community to improve community capacity, community wellness, especially around healing. But we're also deeply committed to doing research. And so all of the programs that we develop are developed out of the best evidence that we can gain through doing research to give us the foundations that we need to develop good programming that will have a lasting impact in our community. So when we were approached by Natalie to participate in the Arctic Corridors project, it really was something that fitted with much of the work that we were doing and many of the concerns that people in the community had about the situation with our oceans. So you can see Arviat perched way in the south there, one of the most southern communities in Nunavut. But we are an ocean community, and we certainly are a community that harvests in the ocean and relies on our ocean harvest to a very significant extent. We're also the community just north of Churchill, Manitoba, and with the desire of Manitoba to become an international port again, to increase shipping out of that port, it obviously is a concern for us to make sure that our interests are recognized as that kind of increase in shipping begins to happen. Also, just north of us, there is an enormous increase in mining activity. And so that also has impacted on the amount of shipping that is either coming in resupply from Montreal, so, you know, around to our communities, or what is preferred is a resupply from Churchill, Manitoba. So we really want to understand what, you know, the impacts of increased shipping are going to be on our community, and to have also an understanding of the climate change impacts that our community is facing. And so one of our main concerns that we have been monitoring since about 2010, we've been actively monitoring climate change through the Akiyamavik Society. One of our big concerns is the lack of precipitation that our community gets. And so this means a real loss of snow cover on our ice, a significant reduction in the amount of water in our rivers and streams. So this decreases the amount of water going into the Hudson Bay. And the Hudson Bay itself is experiencing glacial rebound. So in fact, our waters are becoming shallower and shallower every year. And this is in a community where we have some of the longest tidal flats in the world. So it really is impacting on our ability to access the waters, on the temperature of the waters, on our access to wildlife, and quite significantly on the safety of traveling in our waters, because we have all of these emergent reefs and shoals that are appearing, none of which have been charted. So from these two perspectives, from the increased shipping that we know is coming, and from the impacts of climate change, we're a community who is really interested in understanding how we could become more proactive in addressing these issues. And we see that as through gathering our own evidence, through participating in research, such as the one that Natalie has just described. Oops. So in terms of the recommendation, oops, what happened there? The recommendations that came out of the research, our community-specific recommendations really focused on our need for very accurate charting. Because of the rebound in the Hudson Bay, you know, we have got dangerous waters that needed charting. And also we need to be able to advocate for where we might require navigational buoys, where we should be identifying danger spots for people who are traveling, and especially for shipping. We also, one of the key recommendations was around the capacity for search and rescue, and our lack of capacity for, you know, things like oil spills or the dangerous impacts of that might come from shipping. So for example, when we have resupply ships, because our waters aren't charted, the resupply ships anchor way offshore, and then they unload onto a barge, and the barge brings the resupply items into the community. But it's doing this in dangerous sea conditions. So often, as it's unloading these sea cans full of goods, they're being dropped into the sea and then washed ashore somewhere down the coast. or they're trying to come into our community after the ice is formed and they're crashing through the ice. Our fuel resupply is also occurring after the ice is formed in many cases. And so this is creating very dangerous conditions that we as a community want to be able to respond to. But that lack of planning and lack of responsibility is certainly a concern. We're also a community that is experiencing a lot of degradation in terms of permafrost degradation. So we see this change in our permafrost as impacting on our local coastline. And then, you know, when you have a lot of slumping along the coastline that may be impacted by wash from increased shipping or wash from increased activity, this is an area where we really felt we needed to also become proactive in. And then the impacts of ice, which are significant when you remove the traditional amount of snow cover that protects the ice. We're only beginning to understand how these changes in our ice conditions may be impacted by increased shipping coming out of Churchill, Manitoba, but also how those changes in those ice conditions may cause safety issues for community harvesters who are trying to use the ice for travel. So one of the things that we're doing in terms of understanding our ice and the shipping impacts is investigating, trying to monitor the actual ice conditions. And so we have become a partner with Smart Ice, where our youth, Ujiswinak Young Hunters program, is regularly monitoring ice conditions. We train youth in using the technology to take that information, create maps that we can share with the other people in the community to show where ice conditions are safe, where they're not safe, and the types of ice that we're encountering and how the types of ice that we're seeing are changing and what impacts that might have in terms of community use of our ice shelf. Something else that we're doing is actively charting our coastline. And again, this was something that came out of our work with the Arctic corridors. We recognized through participation in that project that it was important that we get this information. It was important that we get this information now. And it was important that we not sit around and wait for somebody to do this work, that we needed to do the work ourselves. And so we invested in Hydrobox technology with our partners at M2 Oceans and Sidco. And we've begun charting our own waters in the hope that we can create our own maps, such as the one you see here, which will help our harvesters understand the risk and safety issues when traveling in our local waters. One of the things that we're very pleased about is that the maps are being reviewed by the Canadian Hydrographic Service and also by the Canadian Coast Guard for the quality of the maps that we're producing. And if it's deemed that the quality of these maps are significant, then they will adapt our marine maps for their own use. And so we're really pleased about that. And I've shared a link there to a conference presentation on the collaborative efforts using the Hydrobox technology that Akkumavik has been doing with M2 Oceans. And in that conference presentation, it further describes this initiative. So the lessons learned coming out of the collaborative research that we did in the Arctic Corridors project really reinforces those 4 areas that Natalie identified. We have huge levels of engagement because this work is hugely relevant to us and our hunters. And it also helped us to recognize the need, the urgency around the issues that were described through the research, and our need to become proactive in finding our own answers, finding our own solutions, identifying what the issues were for our community specifically, so that we could create better search and rescue initiatives, that we could advocate for better planning in terms of community preparedness, and that we could begin to provide evidence through our Smart Ice data and our Hydrobox data to say, this is what we're seeing. Here is the hard evidence, and this is what we need going forward. We need buoys in these areas. We need GPS mapping so that people can safely travel in our waters. I also want to say that Akkumavik has always been engaged in facilitating research with research partners, wherever research partners can come alongside us and help us to get the training or the equipment or the evidence that we need to do our research that is going to improve our outcomes. We've always been very actively supporting those kinds of efforts. And certainly every time we engage with research partners, we build our own capacity and learn significantly from that. And our Ujisuinak Young Hunters program is an example of how we create training opportunities with whatever expertise we find inside or outside our community, and then create the opportunity for our young hunters, who are seen here in this picture, to become message carriers of information back to the community. So in taking on that role, these youth have the opportunity to develop their reputation as people who can effectively collect data and then take that data and create information messages that they can bring back to the community in their own language, in the best way to communicate that language. And this is a way that creates opportunities for youth to become contributing members to their community. This is critically important for young people to be able to effectively give back to community, because that's an example of Pijitsanak serving community, and it's one of the basic IQ expectations for all Inuit. So it's become a really excellent opportunity to showcase what youth can do and how they can effectively share information in ways that are really proactive. So we want to make sure that we're very systematic and effective in our monitoring efforts. We want to continually be training, especially training youth, but bringing in everyone in the community to look at these issues and to address them collectively. We want to be communicating broadly what we're learning to all levels. And we want to keep building on this sense of urgency about how we can impact change, how we can be, continue to be proactive, because for Inuit, from an Inuit perspective, information only becomes knowledge when you apply it in such a way that it improves the well-being of everyone in the community. And so we want to take the recommendations that came out of the Arctic Corridors research and be able to mobilize those recommendations in the ways that I've just been describing. And so certainly those have been the lessons that we've taken from this research. And these are some of the ways that we're trying to continue to build on the information that research created in order to mobilize knowledge and turn it into effective results in our community. So thank you for your attention. And I'll turn it over to Natasha.
Thank you, Shirley. Like both Shirley and Natalie has said, my name is Natasha Simoni. I'm from Untitled Nunavut. I was a research participant and a facilitator with Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices project. Untitled is located on the northern tip of Baffin Island. So it's the northernmost community on the island. And prior COVID, our community can be described as being a research hub, and our waters can be described as being a shipping highway, which means that we often saw about 30 or more ships in front of our community in a shipping season. And this number does not include any of the shipping of iron ore done by the Baffin Land Mare River Mine. But this number does include like cruise ships, exploratory fishing vessels, pleasure crafts, and other vessels that Natalie mentioned earlier. In addition to shipping, our community witnesses a constant flow of researchers coming and going, and all the research that's done in or around our community stems from many different interest areas, academics, government departments, pretty much everything. We see researchers interested in anything from small mammal habitats such as lemmings, plant life, marine mammals, migratory birds, socioeconomic sea ice, pretty much anything and everything has found its place here for research. And our community was really starting to struggle with the managing of research. And our community doesn't have like an organization, a community-based organization to manage the amount of research that happens in our community like they have in Clyde River, Itak, or like Arvets Archaeomavik Society. All of the research conducted in our communities is communicated through our Hunters and Trappers organization, or the Hamlet. And the demand of research in our community was becoming very heavy and demanding. And So for us, that was, I think, our biggest challenge or struggle at the time. Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices project came to our community. And so this project was a very new and interesting way for communities to take part in research, but to also conduct research. We got to try new approaches. We got to discuss what we wanted to see as a community. And one of the most interesting things our community got to take part in was to plan the entire series of events that was going to take place, right from like pre-research, like Natalie said, all those informal meetings and introductions. We got to help plan all of that, and we got to engage interest in our community before the project actually took place. And I think that was one of our biggest takeaways, was that experience. For a community with heavy ship traffic like Pond Inlet, shipping concerns were ever present, and our community had lots to say, and our community was genuinely interested because of the amount of shipping that happens around here. The way that the Shipping Corridors project was introduced to the community was empowering, because the community got to feel what it means to be fully engaged in the process of a research project, but also to continually stay engaged throughout all steps of the project, right from the beginning all the way to the end, which means the pre-community engagement, as I mentioned, but also right through to the report writing and to the validation of results and result sharing. Very early in the project, we discovered that our community had deep concerns for the way shipping is managed around our community, especially with the activities of shipping iron ore by Baffinland. The mine port is just southwest of our community, and they ship in our open water season. But in addition to that, other shipping concerns were like tourism, cruise ships, and the impacts or concerns that stem from all the shipping activity were anything from food security to cultural activities such as hunting and camping, or even intercommunity travel through a combination of both sea, ice, and land. And in taking part in this project, we learned and also witnessed the benefits of what meaningful research looked like in our community. We gained a new understanding of collaborative working relationships, both with youth, elders, community members, knowledge holders, but also with Western science. The benefits of working with multiple community members from all avenues of expert levels, including researchers, search and rescue, different community leaders. The environment that was created to conduct this research allowed for a very welcoming data sharing environment, but it was also a memorable one. People still speak of this experience today and still refer to the positive outcomes of this particular project. I believe that it has shaped the way our community approaches research now, And one comment shared was that the community has never felt so involved in the process of a project, right from drafting ethics forms right through to data validation and report sharing. And our community has many people that are involved in many different aspects of research. And so although research was not new to our community, the way this particular project was done allowed for many benefits. Since then, the community has been able to approach research involvement in new ways, adapting the things like the lessons that we learned. And some of the greatest lessons that we took away as a community was that there will always be challenges, but we are more comfortable to take each research project and find those collaborative working ways to overcome those challenges. And we learned that youth really want to help. Elders have a strong dependency on youth. Like Natalie was saying, elders were asking youth for advice and for lessons on different things, while youth were doing the same with elders. And I think I can conclude with the statement that the best research outcomes are achieved when lifelong friendships are formed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and I hope you'll all join me in thanking all of our panelists for what was a very thoughtful and engaging discussion. So what I'd like to do now is open up the floor for questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to present to our speakers, please take a moment and just type it out, drop it into chat, and then we will read them to our speakers. And I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask just to get us started. I think most pressingly, what advice would our panelists have for anyone in the audience who's interested in collaborating with Northern communities? Whether they are from government or from industry or from, nonprofit sector, what would you tell them for best practice? And that is open to any of our panelists.
Maybe I can start. So at Akimavik, we kind of have a policy and procedure in place. If a Southern researcher approaches us with an idea for research, as long as it is something that fits with the needs of our community, we generally welcome that kind of collaboration, and we will invite that person, in especially pre-COVID days, to come to our community, or at least to meet with our community to present their ideas, but hopefully with a willingness to negotiate their research questions around the concerns and needs of the community. So we definitely want to work with Southern researchers, but we want to be able to collaboratively and collectively ask questions and gather evidence that also meets our needs. So generally when we come to that place where we can build a shared understanding about the research, good research questions and community needs, and where we want to take a project, then we begin to build a relationship where we can come along beside a researcher and do some of that logistical support, share information about Inuit culture, about work that's been done in the past, assist with connecting a researcher with the key experts in our community, those kinds of things. But generally we want somebody to approach us with a willingness to come alongside and collaborate and negotiate research that can be done in this collaborative way.
Thank you very much. Natalie or Natasha, do you have anything else to add?
I agree with everything Shirley said. It's the same for us up here. That was one of the things that we struggled with a lot, was when our research proposal was presented to our community, the first question, I guess the first two questions we would ask is, one, do we have any room to adjust your research question? And two, how open are you to discussing and meeting with our community informally before you just come in and conduct research?
I guess from maybe the Southern researcher point of view, my advice might be to be really flexible, be ready to listen and learn, because it's going to be fascinating being in the communities. Be ready to laugh a lot. There's going to be a lot of laughter amidst all of that hard work. And be really open to forming strong working relationships and friendships, because people will be very welcoming and interested.
Thank you very much. So we have one question here. So Budget 2021 has set aside money for the National Trade Corridor Fund. The federal funding involves a climate lens. Do you think it should involve another lens for companies to consider when applying for federal funding? And that's for anyone who wants to jump on it. So perhaps what we can do, if there's, if there's questions that require maybe a little bit more thinking or a little bit more, to delve into it a little bit more, like if we don't know off the top of our tongue, then what we can do is that we'll gather the questions and then we'll share them with our panelists afterwards in case they want to reach out and touch base with the audience member who asked. So another question here. Sorry.
Amber, I can just quickly respond.
Perfect.
At Akimavik, we're very concerned about climate change. And so that climate lens is definitely a priority for us. But the other lens is the community lens. What are the needs? What are the interests? What are the activities that are going to be impacted in the community? So definitely we would want companies to understand, community use and community aspirations and community concerns. So there's the climate lens, there's the community lens, and then of course I would always add to that, there's the cultural lens. Like, how do we come alongside in a culturally respectful way with, Indigenous communities? So I'll just leave it there.
That's fantastic. Thank you. We have another question. If there was one thing you could do differently to improve the success of this project, what might it have been?
I can start if you like. There's
Absolutely.
a couple, but one of them that we learned along the way that I wish we had done right from the start is originally we would go and do the youth training and then the knowledge documentation workshops. And then I'd go back to Ottawa, we'd make the maps, write the reports, and maybe come back a few months later. Toward the end of the project, what I started doing is bringing a GIS technician with me. And we would stay in the community and write the report and do the maps. And then a week later or so, week to 10 days, we could share the results right then while it was still fresh and new and we had that momentum. So I wish I had known that at the start and that we had set it up that way as we got faster and faster at doing the analysis. That was great.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Natasha, Shirley, is there anything that you perhaps would have done differently or going forward that you would like to keep in mind?
Maybe two very minor things. One was learning about the ethics process. I wish we had known more about that process sooner, and knowing how flexible we were to adjust or change the ethics form. And two, I think it always comes down to the timing. I wish sometimes we had more time to spend in the community. Like Natalie said, the community had so much to say, but we had so little time, and we had to find that very fine balance of meeting both the research objectives, but also making sure we were including what the community had to say. And if we had a little bit more time, I think we could have dug deeper into some really interesting data.
Absolutely. There's a question in chat now, actually, for Natalie. So it reads, thanks for sharing your learnings and for a really insightful presentation. What are your recommendations on how future initiatives can continue or recreate this level of reciprocal engagement and capacity building, given the challenges created by pandemics, such as working in a virtual capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question, one that I think many people are challenged by. I think a real key is in partnering with organizations who are based in Inuit Nunangat, because in that way, there are people who are there that are going to mobilize research participants, and youth can assist with training. We have some coming up with another project where, the Southern-based scientists are going to train the youth in Arviat. This is Shirley's, a project Shirley's part of. They're going to teach them virtually how to do the sampling and techniques, and then the youth will go and do it. And I'm sure they'll come back and give feedback and say, this worked, this didn't work. Increasingly, it seems to be easier to do this stuff virtually, which is wonderful. But I think building on existing relationships, if you have them, and if not, really working to try and build those relationships with local organizations. We're still doing things like sending an update once a year, posting on Facebook, phoning people, just saying hello through messaging. Like, we're still keeping in touch, just that it's not in person.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Actually, just building on that, so I know that this was a lengthy project. How do the three of you see like the partnerships, the relationships, the capacities that you've built through this project extending into the future, so the next 5, 10, 15 years or so, vis-a-vis climate change?
I'll start. The nature of this project is that many of the decisions around what's going to happen going forward are not controlled at the community level. For Inuit, knowledge must have an impact. There must be an action that results, a positive action that results. And so, at the community level, we're able to, and we must, according to the cultural mandate that we're given, we must take the information that we gain from this research project and put it into some positive action that's going to positively impact the community. But much of what we really want to happen is at another level. You know, it's out there at a policy level, it's at a federal level, it's in agencies and in organizations that we don't directly impact. And so, you know, there is a long period of time between the recommendations that were made at the that came out of the research and how those may ultimately impact decisions that are made by those groups that directly you know, control what's going to happen with these shipping corridors. So it's really important that we continue to be supportive of those Southern researchers who may be able to influence have influence at those tables, and stay connected and keep feeding them, you know, the wishes and the concerns that continue to be raised at the community level. And so in that way we can, you know, keep working together and hopefully over the long term begin to see some results from the collective work that we did.
Thank you very much. Natalie, Natasha, do you have anything to add to Shirley's comments?
Natalie, you can go first.
I can go ahead, sure. So your question, Amber, was about how our existing relationships we can continue to leverage and build on them in the next, say, 10 to 15 years. Is that right? So, I mean, we already are. For instance, the work that I did in Arviat and Pond Inlet that we did was in, I believe, 2016 and 2017. But we've continued to write papers with each other. We're now looking, for instance, at Natasha's leading a paper that is in its second review, so it's going to be out soon, but about Inuit uses and needs of weather, wind, and ice information, and how they combine those with their own knowledge to create forecasts for safe travel. So we're already working on that. And Shirley and I have worked on a couple of other projects as well about documenting Inuit knowledge of snow geese in the community. And we just submitted a letter of intent to continue some of that work next week. And what happens is when we're together, these other priorities just come up in conversation while you're having a tea or discussing, or I'll say, oh, I also did this work somewhere else. So just by being together and talking, we realize, oh, we have a shared interest, we can write a proposal and then continue that work.
For us in Pond, the relationships have continued even locally, like our participants and our trainees, our youth trainees, everybody that was involved. We now have our own, like a number of working relationships in the community that we necessarily didn't have prior to the project. So it has allowed for even that kind of growth, and for everybody else involved in the project, like both Shirley and Natalie have mentioned, maintaining those relationships in different ways, whether it be finding common interest in different projects or even friendships, and continuing those relationships. We're able to ensure that communication is maintained in many different ways. For the amount of research that was happening in our community before COVID, we weren't always maintaining those relationships, but the way that this particular project was conducted in our community, we have had like a continuous working relationship with a large group of people. And I think it's because of the way the project was done, because of the way we were able to form those relationships even locally. It's because of the little things that we made sure to pay attention to that allowed for that success.
If I
Thank
can
you.
just add,
Yes, of course.
you know, there's a lot of tension between Inuit communities and their experiences with research. And so when you're able to build trusted relationships, you know, they continue to pay back, because you're going to engage with those trusted relationships into the future. You know, they've proven themselves to be open to community, open to cultural nuances, respectful of that. And so you're going to want to continue to engage with those people because they're in that trusted relationship with you. And so, you know, it might take a Southern researcher time to build that level of trust, but once it's gained, it will continue to pay back because you will be welcomed into the Northern research community, and you know, we will go to you and say, this is something that, you know, this is a question we have. We need to look into this. Is this something you could help us with? So it's definitely, I think, worth building those kinds of, taking the time to build those kinds of relationships, because once you're engaged with us, you would, you know, continue to engage with us well into the future.
Shirley, that was wonderfully said. And it's a perfect segue to the next question. So we've touched on this a bit, but Meg asks, you know, is this project complete? Is it finished? And if so, what are next steps or the next project you plan on addressing?
I can start if you like talking about specifically the Arctic Corridors project and the way that the University of Ottawa part of it is going, or our research group. What we heard in every single community was Inuit wish to be and must be included in the ongoing management and development of the low impact shipping corridors. And so right now we're in the midst of a survey that we're doing across Inuit Nunangat, and also with academics and government at various levels, with industry, learning about the strengths and weaknesses of the corridors and who should be involved in managing them, what role those organizations or individuals should take, and what sort of governance bodies should be used. So we're building on the project, but we've now shifted more into the governance and how communities and stakeholders in the South and throughout can be involved in this decision making.
Thank you. Shirley or Natasha, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I'll just support, you know, for us, we're very supportive of this next step, this survey work, because you know, as I just said a while ago, it's really important that this hit the policy people who can work with us to implement the kinds of changes that we want to see. So in order to move it forward, we have to keep bringing the work back to, you know, the different levels of decision makers, but always putting on the table that we, being, you know, Inuit communities, need to be engaged, need to be consulted, need to be part of the solution seeking that is going to get us to a good place in the end. So I don't think the work is ever finished, but we're certainly, you know, as a community organization, we certainly want to be participant and we want to be supportive of it. wherever it's going next.
Absolutely. And I have to say, Shirley, this is twice or three times now you've given me the perfect springboard into the next question. So we know how much, Arctic communities need to be involved and want to be involved in these, high level decision making to do with their own community. So what has been the reaction or the response to this project and its outcomes from the government, whether it's local or all the way up to federal?
Do you want me to start that one?
Anyone can jump on it. Anyone who wants.
Well, certainly from, there are different levels, absolutely. So for instance, the territorial government in Nunavut, we held a workshop with many of them and other decision makers in Nunavut a couple of years ago, and they were absolutely embracing this and wanting the research to be done in every community, that the youth could lead this and continue it. So at that level, it was really a lot of uptake for sure, and appreciation and support. The federal government, the agencies that are involved have also been very supportive and very interested. We've had no confirmation that the information will be, used in prioritizing the corridors. I do know that for specific communities that have given their permission, we've shared the maps of the culturally significant marine areas, and the federal agencies are going to use those in their upcoming engagements with communities. And so they're being used for that. But some of the other side projects, for instance, been used in finalizing the placement of marine conservation areas and these sorts of things. So other agencies in the federal government are also using the information that was documented through it. So I'll stop there. It looks like maybe Natasha wants to share. I'm not sure.
So I know that Natasha is having a little bit of trouble with internet connectivity. So she's only partially able to follow some of what's being said. So Shirley, did you have anything to add, or if Natasha's back online, if she has anything she wants to say?
Well, I'll just say that, in our community, and I'm pretty sure this is the same in Natasha's community, but we want to take the information and move it forward as much as we can ourselves. And, so that's why we've invested in and engaged in things like the marine mapping, and, we're doing permafrost monitoring, those kinds of things. So whatever we can do to build capacity and to gather evidence at the community level, which then can, support the advocacy or the lobbying that needs to be done at other levels, we're going to continue to do that. So definitely, we want to be engaged in moving the work forward wherever possible.
Thank you. So we're getting close to the time. We have the room for one or two more questions. I have a private message here. So we've talked at great length about how youth have contributed to this project. How has this project contributed or contributed for youth? So in other words, how has it benefited youth in the communities? If you could please elaborate.
Maybe I'll start with that one. So our community, the Akimavik Society, is committed to working with youth. 2/3 of our population is under the age of 18, so it's kind of a no-brainer for us. So all of our programs have focused on youth and building youth capacity. So when this project came along, we engaged our Ujiswinak Young Hunters program, which is a program focused on building youth capacity around environmental monitoring and sustainable harvesting. But of course, you know, we're also building their capacity in terms of being frontline researchers, and in training them in multimedia, for example, so that they can develop messages and develop formats and become message carriers back to the community. And of course, youth are so eager to have access to, you know, the technology, the information, to be involved. Like they're so responsive to any opportunity where they can work with our knowledge holders, like our elders or expert harvesters. Like this is just so many rich opportunities for youth to engage in, you know, these opportunities where they can really be learning. They can be in respectful relationship with these people in the community. And again, just as, you know, the research relationships become trusted and long-term, these relationships that youth develop by working with elders, working with expert harvesters, they become trusted and long-term. So that, you know, youth who engaged initially with elders in our Ujisuinak program, long after they've left that program, are still seeking out elders for their advice, seeking out those elders for support. So these are really essential capacity building opportunities that have been created in our community, and youth lap them up. Like they just can't get enough of them. Many of our youth say, you know, I learned so much more in my after school program in Ujisuinak that I ever would learn in sitting through science classes in the high school. This is where the real learning is taking place, that they can use to build significant in their lives. So, so these are great opportunities that we want to make available as much as possible.
Thank you so much, Shirley. That was incredibly informative. I know, again, Natasha's having internet connectivity issues. I just wanted to give her the opportunity to reply in case she was able to get back online. No, I think we might have lost her. Natalie, did you?
She actually texted me an answer. So
Oh, did she? Great.
Hear us, but maybe can't. Anyway, she said the many benefits from here have been a huge interest in academic training, such as the environmental technology program at Nunavut Research or Nunavut Arctic College, or assisting roles in research. But they're also more comfortable to connect with elders and ask questions, but also a genuine increase in sharing ideas and concerns and such things like that.
Wonderful. So we are right up at time. I just want to take a minute and give our presenters a chance to, if there's any last remarks that they wanted to have, anything they wanted to say to wrap up. Natalie, Shirley, or Natasha?
Sure. I'll just say thanks again for the invitation, and it's always lovely to connect with Shirley and Natasha and to discuss these topics. So thanks so much for having us today.
Thank you.
Yes, it was a lovely opportunity, and we really appreciate every chance to promote the research and to have it understood by others. And hopefully is a way of building that research capacity again. And I invite people to check out the Akiumavik website. And if there are any common areas of interest there with anybody who's participating, we welcome you to get in touch with us because we love to collaborate. So thanks to everyone.
Well, I hope you'll all join me in thanking our presenters for what was a very thoughtful and engaging discussion. We will be posting this video on our website, so keep an eye out for the link that we'll send around. And other than that, thank you very much on behalf of the CORC and our partners for joining us today. Take care.